by construction phase. Thank you. The QS property valuation, the QS valuation by construction phase, the QS plan review, town and country approval. And there are two little things that people generally forget, and that's the water authority. You need to set up a new account and temporary water installation fee. And you also have to set up a new account with the Barbados Light and Power and a temporary electricity installation fee as well. So these are all little things that you kind of need to plan ahead for and be aware that these are expenses that are going to come. Now, post home ownership, what you normally have is, and this is after the fact, you've gotten into the house, you have the key, the contractor says, here, we are done. So you need the industrial or the construction clean before you move in. And once you have a good contractor, he's going to do a post clean. But particularly we like, Caribbean people, we like to go through again, right? So you might want to pay for an additional construction clean. Your furniture and appliances, you might be buying new or maybe transferring from your rental, landscaping, maintaining the annual home and contents insurance. And this is very important because you bought a home and you want to make sure it's now protected. And here's something that a lot of people don't know. When you buy home insurance, it only covers the brick and mortar. It does not cover all the contents inside. It doesn't cover your furniture. It doesn't even cover your fixtures. So contents insurance, however, is what covers those items. Okay, so that's why it's important to have both. You might want to purchase a security system. And just a little FYI on this could actually reduce your home insurance premium as well. So you have a security system when you're buying home insurance. You inform the carrier that you have a security system, whether it's burglar bars or an actual system, and that can impact the insurance premium that you pay on your house. You want to maintain safety equipment, maybe have the fire extinguisher in the house and smoke detectors. Home maintenance such as gardening, plumbing, electrical, or maybe even maid services. You want to have water tank treatments, annual or biennial grease trap cleaning. For example, I get my grease trap cleaned every January, well, it's not going to be February. So every February by the grease trap man. And as much as that might seem a little much for most persons, maintenance is better than having to repair. So those are the types of things that you have to think about after you own the house. There's the monthly or quarterly pest control. Personally, I have to do mine quarterly. I live in St. Philip. Termite treatments every 5+ years. And these are all the things that you need to be able to keep in mind after you own a home. It doesn't end after you have built or after you've purchased. So just keep that in mind. So how do you actually financially plan for all these things? We're going to first take a look at financially planning for buying a home. So you've made that decision, right? You've decided how many rooms you need, how many bathrooms, which parish you're considering, and you have a realtor. So what money is needed and when? That's the real question, right? So you need to determine what's your pre-approved amount. What could you possibly get in a mortgage? And this is something you need to communicate with the architect, contract, draftsman, or anybody, right? Quantity surveyor to get the property valued. You want to find out where the cost of the legal fees and the stamp duty on the mortgage. One other thing that you need to consider with buying is you might want to consider getting an engineer to assess the property to make sure the property is sound. So these are just things to think about pre-buying. So post-buying now, you have the industrial pre-moving clean, you have the home and contents insurance, and you have to buy furniture and appliances, right? All right. So what about home ownership if you are building a home, which is vastly different, right? So you've decided that I've looked around, I haven't found something that I want from my realtor. My realtor is going to look for a piece of land for me and I'm going to build on this land. Okay, so you've made that decision. What are the obligations now that are going to be associated with making that decision, right? So again, you need to know what's your pre-approved amount. How much could I possibly get in a mortgage? And I want to stress this. Because you are pre-approved for $600,000 doesn't mean you should get the $600,000. Circumstances always change. You may change jobs, you may lose your job, or one person in the household may lose their job or have to downsize. And you don't want to be left with a mortgage that can only be serviced by one person, but that one person's salary might not be able to handle it. So don't go and necessarily get the full amount that you qualify for, right? Write a list of what you want in your home and identify the things that are needs versus wants, and then the nice to haves. So for example, you need to have a bathroom, you need to have closets, you need to have a kitchen. A nice want might be a walk-in closet versus just drawers or the regular built-in closets. A nice to have might be a pool. So you get the big difference between what you need, what you want, and what's nice to have. So that when you sit down with your architect, you sit down with your architectural technologist, you can decide, well, whenever you do need to cut back, here are the areas or the things that are nice to have that I can cut back first and foremost. And then once that list is done, you can always then cut back from the things that you want versus the things you need. Get an approximate cost from a contractor of the wants and the nice to have, but can do without. That's what I call that list. Get the architect or engineer to perform test holes to determine the soil type and depth prior to purchasing land. There's so many stories of persons purchasing land, and after purchasing it, they might have done all the work. They might have had drawings done from before. They're ready to go. And at the point where the contractor goes to dig foundation, realize that they have to go 6 feet or 8 feet or 10 feet in, for example, just to hit rock. And that obviously then increases the amount of expenses you would have. So doing things like test holes, even though it's an expense up front, it's a cheaper expense to have rather than buying a land that requires thousands of dollars to go into foundation development, okay? The QS plan review. This is to assess the cost of the project prior to submitting to Town and Country. The last thing you want to do is to submit something to Town and Country planning where you then find out you can't afford it, and then you need to make changes. And then, forbid you have to make changes that require you to resubmit plans again, which means you have to go through that process again. So try to avoid that and actually get a QS from early before you go to submit, just to price out how much your project will actually cost. Find out the cost of legal fees, yours and the bank's, and the stamp duty. That's something that a lot of people don't remember to do. A stamp duty is something that can be approximately 1% of the amount that you are borrowing. Town and Country plan approval. The contractor's insurance. Now, you should always get a rate for that. And what that is the amount that you pay in insurance before the project starts. You need to have that in place before the contractor comes on the property and starts building. Town and Country building start certificate or letter. And of course, again, it would be the temporary installations of your utilities. So during the building process, here are some things you have to consider. The quantity surveyor report. So normally with building properties, what would happen is you will, at each stage or each drawdown that the bank or financial institution gives you money, at the end of the stage, before they release any more funds, it requires a QS report. That QS report is submitted to the bank, who then submits it to you. And it basically outlines to you, as at this stage, this is the amount of value that your property has, and they compare that to the amount of money that the bank has given you. And if your QS report is not within reasonable range of the amount of money the bank gave you, the bank will not allow you to draw down more. And an example of that is, let's say you reach stage 2 and you've drawn down $80,000 today. The QS submits a report, and your report says that what is on site currently is only valued at $50,000. That's a red flag. The bank won't release anymore. If they go and the QS report says what's on site right now is $75,000, then that's more a more reasonable range, and they will allow the next drawdown. So those are things to kind of keep in mind, and that's why that QS is important. The bridging loan, this is interest only on the amount used to date. So every stage that you withdraw money from the bank or the financial institution, it counts as a bridging loan. You're only paying the interest amount, but guess what? The interest amount of any mortgage is always the highest amount between what is going towards interest and what is going towards principal at the start of a mortgage, okay? And then there's obviously incidentals, things happen. So before you build, before you move in, you need the government and electrical certificate, you need to pass certifications. Town and Country needs to give a compliance certificate. And once you have those things, you actually submit those to your bank, and your bank converts your bridging loan into an actual mortgage or and you go from there and you start actually making the full mortgage payment at that point. Now, again, I keep mentioning this, the post-construction clean, home and contents insurance, and of course, furniture and appliances. So here's a fun fact. The process is less daunting when you plan. If you go about home ownership and you do not plan for it, then it's going to be daunting, you're going to be stressed out, it's going to become very overwhelming. And it's not to say that even when you plan, it doesn't, but the degree to which you become overwhelmed is significantly different. So always make sure you plan every step of the way. And I'll give you an example. When I built my home, I created a document I'm sure drove my contractor and my architect up a wall, but it kept us on track and it kept us all accountable. And that document outlined each room. So there was 2 pages set aside for each room: master bedroom, second bedroom, third bedroom, bathroom, kitchen. These are all the things, along with pictures, prices, where we could get them from, so that I can kind of plan and so they were aware. And it also allowed my architect to be able to see what kind of design or design thoughts I wanted for my home, so that when they designed and they priced out, that it all came together. So planning is essential to this process. So here's a practical exercise, okay? And I don't want you to be alarmed by the numbers. This is just me throwing together some numbers so you can get an idea of what goes into you actually planning financially for home ownership. So we have the family here, we call them the Browns. And here's the scenario, here's the information about the Browns, okay? They're a married couple, they're both 35 years old. The husband works for a gross salary of 6,000 Barbados. Wife works for a gross salary of 7,000 Barbados. They have no kids currently. They're renting at $1,500 per month, including utilities. They both have a car loan with an original principal of $60,000 at an interest rate of 6% for 5 years. They both pay out just above $1,100 a month for their car. They have a balance of $32,000 on their loans, and the cars are each valued at $45,000. The wife has a credit card debt with a balance of $10,000. The minimum repayment amount is $300. The interest rate, as you will notice, is 23%. They want to buy land and build their own home at Barbados, $500,000. So that's what they've decided on. So they have their realtor help them, is going to help them find land. They're going to go through the building process, right? The wife has $5,000 in savings. The husband has $3,000 in savings, and they have joint savings of $6,000, okay? So let's get started on the Browns. So the couple needs to first assess what's their current financial position. So I'm going to take a look at what is their net worth. And essentially your net worth is your assets minus your liabilities. Now, financial institutions generally don't take a look at your net worth, but for your personal financial planning, you should. So if your net worth is positive, it means that your assets are greater than your liabilities. And if it's negative, it's in the reverse, right? That means you have a problem. So here are the Browns' assets. Their cars, their savings comes up to $104,000. Their liabilities, the 2 cars and the credit card debt, comes up to $74,000. So what that means is that their net worth is currently $29,500, right? So they're actually in the green. So far, so good. Their net worth is positive. So let's take a look at their actual monthly expenses. So what is their disposable income, right? And this is something that the financial institution will assess. What is your disposable income, so they can determine how much you have available that you can actually service the mortgage. So Mr. Brown spends $4,761.23 each month from his $6,000 per month salary, right? This means that his disposable income is $1,238.77. So from his $6,000 per month, NIS is deducted, PAYE is deducted. He pays 50% of the rent, so $750. The rent includes utilities. Utilities are $0. He has his car loan. He puts in $450 in gas per month. He contributes 50% to groceries, $350. His cell phone bill is $120. His personal savings, he puts in $500 a month, and in joint savings, he puts $400. Now, I want you to see something interesting about this diagram, where I actually included savings as a part of the expenses. And that's important, right? because your savings, you're taking it out from the monthly, from the money that is available. It's not part of your disposable income. You're setting that money aside, so we're going to count it as an expense. So he has $1,200 available each month, right? Let's take a look at Mrs. Brown. So Mrs. Brown, she gets $7,000 per month, and in hand, she spends $5,500 per month, and her disposable income at the end of the month is $1,493.77. So she has some of the same expenses as her husband. She has the credit card payment for $300, which is an additional expense, and she puts more into her personal savings and more into the joint savings than her husband does. Okay. So she ends up with $1,400 in disposable income. So far, so good. Disposable income being greater than zero is a positive thing. So what is your total debt ratio, right? And this is what the financial institutions use to assess you, to see if you are actually able to borrow money, if you can afford it. The ratio only takes into consideration your debts and your future debts. And future debts are the mortgage payment and the land tax obligations for that particular property. Now, in respect to this, you are trying to aim for a ratio that is below 80%, okay? So when we look at the Browns' debts, they have the 2 cars, the credit card payment, the other expenses, the mortgage at 4.75% rate is about $2,600, and that mortgage amount is based on them building a home, buying land and building a home for $500,000, right? The repayment is $2,600 per month. The mortgage related insurance is $791, and the land tax is approximately $3,500, right? Which is about $291 per month. Their gross income is $13,000. So right now, their TDSR, or their total debt ratio, is actually at 74%, which is good. And one of the things that I will tell you here, I've included in this calculation other expenses. They should be like their cell phone and all those other stuff. But banks don't always include all of those expenses when they're determining a TDSR. But for your personal financial planning, you should include all of your expenses that you are aware of. Most of the times, the banks focus on the main things. If you have any loans, which they would get from your credit report, all the loans or debts that you may have, they will take into consideration things like utilities, unless you indicate in case of the Browns that you don't pay utilities, it's included in rent. They'll include rent. They don't necessarily include things like, everyone doesn't include things like cell phone and groceries, right? Which is why I'm saying to you that you should make sure that you include them for yourself. It's so not to overextend. So step 4 in this is knowing what the financial institution is offering and determine what's your pre-approved amount. Every bank, credit union, or financial institution in Barbados has varying terms. So you want to know what's the mortgage period, you want to know what's the interest rate. Right now on the market, I believe for Citizens, for example, is offering 3.5%. A number of the other banks are offering 3.75%. And I think a lot of the credit unions are offering between 3.75 and 4.5%. So depending on where you go, you will know what the mortgage rate is. And it's always important to shop around, call around, find out what their rates are. And the next thing for you to make a decision on is to find out what's their period. So for example, most financial institutions give the minimum between 30 years or age 65 and 70. Now, what does that really mean? So the Browns are 35. In 30 years, they're going to be 65. So they can get a mortgage for the next 30 years until they're age 65. There are some institutions that actually give you a mortgage up to age 70. And that's assuming that the age you are now is, and the age and the number of years until 70 is actually below 30 years, okay? So let's say you are currently 50, you might be able to qualify for a mortgage up to age 70. I know, for example, that Sagicor actually offers, Sagicor's mortgage department actually offers mortgages up to age 70, whichever is a minimum between that and 30 years. Set up a meeting and speak with a loan officer before starting the process with the contractor, the QS, or the architect. Now, the Browns have confirmed with their loan officer that they have been pre-approved for this $500,000 in mortgage at 4.75% for 30 years. And they can now, only now, start planning, right? So Identify the cost and timing of payments for pre-land purchase steps. This is very important. The Browns have a list of preferred QSs from their loan officer, and they're ready to make contact. So they have a piece of land in mind for their project, and they've made an offer. The land is 6,000 square feet, and the house they have in mind is 1,800 square feet, okay? So here are some costs that they need to take into consideration pre-land purchase, okay? The QS valuation is $600, so they need to do that. The architect engineer soil test is $300. And you need to get those done before you purchase the land. You know, obviously you get permission from the current landowner. The Browns legal fees for the land, which is $100,000, is $3,300. I use the example here of public workers, for example. Their legal fees might have been $2,900. So when the legal process is done, when you sign your contract, these funds should be on your account at the start of the process. And that's very important. That's why I call these pre-land purchase costs, right? The draftsman cost is $2 per square foot, so it might be $3,600. And notice I see here draftsman and not architect, and we're going to talk about the difference between the two. And usually is a 50% at the start and the remaining after the plans are completed. Their preferred QS for the plan review is $600, and they need to pay that after the first draft prior to Town and Country submission. The contractor's project pricing are invoiced. The contractor might provide an invoice free of charge. Some contractors do charge to get an invoice. And then is the Town and Country approval. And I've put $300 here because it's $100 up to 999 square feet. It's $200 if it's between 1,000 and 1,499 square feet. And it's $300 if it's between 1,500 and 1,999 square feet, and $400 thereafter. So you have to be able to know that the amount varies for Town and Country planning based on the size of the property that you're building. So identify the cost and timing. Again, that's very important. How much things cost and what's the timing associated with it, right? So you know, for the mortgage, and they're going to require the Browns legal fees might be $1,300. The financial institutions might be $3,600. Stamp duty on the mortgage is $3,000. Remember, I mentioned the stamp duty amount before. The draftsman cost is $3,600, as we discussed. The Barbados Water Authority, the new account, they might ask you to put $400 on the account. Contractors insurance, approximately $1,900, and Town and Country building start certificate is $150, right? So here are some other expenses that you need to think about pre-construction, right? So this is after you have the land and you're now getting ready to build, you're now getting ready to start this project, you're now gearing up. So that's money that you will need. So just to recap, so far the Browns have paid a number of expenses before the first drawdown has even occurred. In total, all of those expenses I just spoke about were $25,759.39. And again, this is based on their specific example where it's on a mortgage for $500,000 in land and house. You might decide you want to have something cheaper or something more expensive. And these are all fictitious numbers. So just make sure you speak to your financial institution, your lawyer, your QS, and your architect to get the correct numbers that will apply to your project. Legal fees and stamp duties alone for this project was $14,000, and all the other expenses were $11,000. Okay, keep that in mind. So what's the cost and timing again during construction? This particular financial institution requires you to 4 phases. So for each phase, they have to pay the QS. So before the financial institution releases, they had to pay the QS $800. So that's $3,200 in all. At the final phase, phase 5, the QS report at that point in time is normally more expensive because that's the report that you would generally use for your full house valuation. The house is done. If you want to sell your house at that point in time, that's the report that you can actually use. That's the value that the bank expects you to get in home insurance as well at the end of the process. And so that report is a lot more detailed, and therefore it costs more. The monthly bridging loan, and that varies based on the amount that you draw down in each phase. So the first phase could be something like $600. By the time you get to the next phase, it might be $900, et cetera, et cetera. You have the Town and Country planning certificate for compliance. That's $150. And then you have the life insurance. And for the Browns, it's a joint first to die or 2 single policies. Now, a joint first to die sounds exactly like the name suggests. It's basically insurance, and whoever's the first person to die, it pays out. And that's as simply as it is, right? So identifying what is their new financial position post-building is very important. So their annual home insurance is $3,000, and that covers just the brick and mortar. Their content insurance, and they bought content insurance for $100,000. That's $500 a year. Termite treatment every 4 to 5 years, $2,500, and that varies based on the size of the home and the land, as well as the company that you use. The grease trap maintenance is $125 per year. The monthly gardener might be $80, and the annual land tax is approximated at $3,500. Okay. So this is their post. They've built their house. They've gone through the entire phase, and now they're at the point where they need to financially plan for everyday living within the house. So they've looked at their monthly expenses relating to the house, the quarterly and the annual expenses. And this is what this represents so that the Browns don't forget. So let's take a look now at what that actually looks like for them. So for the Browns in total, again, they have salaries that total $13,000 between the two of them. They have their NIS and their payee comes out every month. The mortgage is now $2,600. They now have to pay utilities for the first time, and that's $300. The 2 car loans are $2,300. Every month they pay home insurance. So what the Browns do as it relates to home insurance, and I always encourage persons to do this, is they set up what we call a sinking fund. And all that means, all that fancy word means, it's an account or place where you put money on a monthly or weekly or whatever basis that goes towards a big expense at the end of the year or every other year, etc. So home insurance and content insurance is something that is a big expense every year. So what they decided to do is that every month they're going to set aside $250 into an account. So at the end of the year, they have that total amount to pay the home insurance, right? Content insurance worked out to be $58 a month. They have to have life insurance. In case you're not aware, currently, all financial institutions in Barbados require that you have an insurance policy to cover the value of the mortgage. Well, sorry, not the mortgage, of the house. So they have life insurance and they have to pay $500 per month. That insurance doesn't only protect the financial institution, but it also protects your family. So if one of you were to die or both of you were to die, whether it's a joint or single mortgage, it means that upon death, the bank or financial institution will be paid out for the house, and the house will be fully paid for. So imagine that your husband or your wife, knock on wood, were to pass away suddenly. You are left then to pay that mortgage. What that insurance policy does is protect you to ensure that that expense is not yours solely to bear. So the banks, yes, they get back their money, but you also are covered from not having that financial expense, especially if you might have lost the breadwinner in the house, okay? The gas in the cars for them is $900. Car insurance, they're similar to home insurance. They set it aside every month. Groceries are $700. Miscellaneous home stuff, $600. Cell phones, $240. They still put money into their savings, their personal and their joint savings. It might be less now because altogether now they're putting in $600 in their personal, and altogether they're only putting in $500, which is much less than what they started off doing. So their total monthly expenses are now $5,506.23, right? And they spend, now that we've added in the mortgage, etc., they now spend $12,134.04 each month from their $13,000. So they now have a disposable income of $865.96 per month. And that covers their mortgage, the groceries, utilities, car insurance, home insurance, contents insurance, savings, and it definitely covers all their debts, okay? So here are some useful tips. Property valued at $400,000 or less gets a VAT rebate by applying to the Barbados Revenue Authority for first-time home owners only. The rebate is applied to a maximum value of $200,000 at a rate of 7%. So if your property is $400,000, you receive a VAT refund of 7% of $200,000, which means you get back a rebate of 14,000. So when you are filing your annual TAMIS, when you're filing in TAMIS the following year after building, it's your first home and your property is $400,000 or less, you can actually file for this in TAMIS and get that back refund. Okay. Select the types of finishes you want in your home. Most contractors price for average fittings. So if you want fittings that are a little bit over the top, a little fancier, make sure your contractor, your architect, and your QS is aware so that that can be priced in and you're not surprised when the bill comes in or that extra bill comes in. Write out a plan for each room. And I mentioned this earlier, what each room needs in terms of fixtures, furnishings, and it helps you to guide the architect, the contractor, and more importantly, your budget. So here are some useful resources as well. And I've spoken about a few of these places tonight. The Barbados Town and Country Planning, and this is their website. MyTwoCents, which is my page. The BRA land tax, you can always check out how land tax is calculated. And then the BRA VAT refund, you can check out the information on that rebate as well. So now, here is to the fun part of the evening, and it's our guests. So this evening, as you guys would be aware, and feel free to drop all your comments or questions in the chat, whether on Zoom or on IG. And we'll try to get to all of them as much as we can, right? Tonight we have guests, very special guests who are going to walk us through this process. We have Mr. Shane Thompson from far left. At the bottom, we have Mrs. Leandra Jones. Top middle, we have Mr. Nicholas Bell. Bottom right, we have Mr. Jason Green. And top right, we have Mr. Simeon Christophe. So what we're going to do now is to actually go through a series of questions that either you've submitted to me at varying points in times, or these are questions that I generally get whenever I do talks on home ownership and financial planning that are specific to the specialists that are on the call. So Mr. Shane Thompson, we're going to start with you, sir.
Good
as a resident
afternoon.
Lawyer tonight. So here are the questions that we posed to Shane. How are legal fees determined? Why do I have to pay the bank's lawyer's fees? That's a very contentious one. And why is having a lawyer important in the home ownership process? How long does it take on average to complete a land sale or mortgage transaction? What are the steps involved in the legal side of the transaction, right? So here we go, over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. Actually, Nick, I'll do a bit of both. Just because as I was re-looking at the questions, I thought I could expand on them a little more. But as you have it here, we can kind of do it here. So generally speaking in Barbados, attorneys do sit in the calculation of land legal fees relative to land sales, and that is fees that you may be charged as a purchaser of land, that is fees that you may be charged as a seller of land, that is fees that you may be charged as a person acquiring a mortgage to purchase property, and that is fees that you may be charged as the bank's lawyer's fees. Generally, by and large, attorneys do comply with the calculations, what we call the scale of fees, in the non-contentious business rules of Barbados 1997. And those fees are, that piece of legislation is actually Googleable. So you can actually put it in Google and you could find it. This is what I will say, however. That legislation specifically says that those fees are a minimum fee, which means that attorneys can go above that fee if they so desire. Generally speaking, for example, as well, if an attorney charges VAT, they would then charge VAT on that fee. And the reason that the fee is considered a minimum fee is because built into those calculations, the figure you come up with in the end depends as well on which side you are representing and if you're representing more than one side. So if I'm representing the purchaser and the bank, for example, that fee will look different too. If I'm just representing the purchaser, if I'm representing the vendor and the bank, that fee will look different as if I'm just representing the vendor instead of the bank, so on and so forth. What you can do if you want, which I do with my clients, is that I do go through how those fees came about with them. And we actually have, my office has actually created a along with the help from a good friend of mine who actually is on this call, created a fee calculator in Excel spreadsheet, so it's calculated automatically. But there's no magic, there's no pulled out of thin air, there is no creation of a fee the way people seem to think. In fact, what I would on this call is that. Sorry?
Hi,
S, could you put
someone
yourself
is
on mute, please?
currently, can you put it, thank you.
Yeah. What I will also actually say is that because these fees are a minimum fee, attorneys are not actually allowed to go below those fees unless they receive permission from the cost committee based on the circumstances in the piece of legislation. And that came about to kind of level the playing field. So whether you go to attorney A or attorney B, by and large, your fees should be in the same range. But I always reemphasize that it is a minimum fee. And that could mean an attorney could say to you, well, look, your case is not the run of the mill for different reasons. There will be in terms of the type of title you're getting. Maybe you have to put more security in place. So it might just be run of the mill, and an attorney can have a conversation with you about those fees going above and beyond, and any other additional fees that the legislation doesn't consider, because the legislation doesn't consider all the fees that go into this actual work. Remembering that that legislation is 25 years old this year, and the manner and cost of doing business has changed substantially over the years. But that can always be used as your baseline. Sorry, Nick, you want to ask me something?
So before you even go on, what I'm getting from you here, Shane, is the fact that when people wonder, I guess it always feels as though people complain a lot about the fact that legal fees are so high. I really wanted to have you on here because I found it, very important for people to note that legal fees really and truly, the minimum legal fees are set by law.
Yes.
A lot of people don't know that. And
yes.
a lot of people, and it goes to one of the questions that you're going to answer tonight, a lot of people don't know the work that actually goes into the legal side of things to understand what they're paying for.
Yes, I agree. And what I actually have here is, generally speaking, if you actually do a calculation, the legal fees are actually range between 0.5 to 1.5% as a baseline. As I said, because it is a minimum, depending on whether your case is a little more than the run of the mill, it might go above that. But hardly speaking, you would find them going vastly beyond that. And obviously what that means is that the more expensive your transaction is, the higher the legal fee that you pay, which obviously includes, kind of lends to the idea of fairness. Because if even though the legal work is the same, the presumption is that a less financially stable person should be paying less legal fees, and that's why it's a scale calculation. I was hoping to actually have for Nikita today to give to you all the survey that was done actually in Trinidad, where they review their scale of fees, because most Caribbean islands do have a basic scale of fees, and they actually review their scale of fees every few years and look to update it. As you see, again, ours is 25 years old, and they have not had any updates despite the increasing cost of business. And what they found is that the scale was actually below the value of the work that goes into getting your transaction finished. And I was joking with Nikita a couple of days ago and saying to her that I have friends who work in South Africa, etc. And when they find out how much we charge in terms of our fees, they actually laugh, because their fees start at least 15% and go up. So when they
say that again for people to hear.
15%, their fees are at 15% and go up. That is not to say that that is everywhere in Africa, but I do have a couple of friends who are attorneys, specifically conveyancing attorneys. And in South Africa, for example, not every attorney can become a conveyancer. You actually have to do additional qualifications. And that also accounts for why their fees are a little higher. But when I tell them what we charge here, they actually laugh at me and actually ask me how we live. As it relates to number two, why do I have to pay the bank's lawyer fees? There is no law saying you have to pay the bank's lawyer fees. What that is the bank setting its terms upon which it will lend you its money. So if you have the ability, depending on who you are, to negotiate with the bank to say, and I actually know of 2 persons who were able to do it, negotiate with the bank and say, I am not paying your legal fees. When I sit down and I calculate the amount of money between principal and interest that you'll be getting out of me, you can pay your own lawyer. So that is how that comes about. At this point, even though I think it's a little lower, I will also say it is always good, and my office represents financial institutions, so it's even against my interest to say this. It is always good to get your own attorney, even if it costs you more, as it will. The reason for that is, as much as you and the bank's interests align, they are not the same. Let me repeat, they are not the same. They only align to the extent that the bank wants to make sure that the title that is being passed to you is proper for the bank's security, not for you to own it, for the bank's security. Because unless proper title is passed and you default, the bank will have challenges in recovering the money that was paid out using that security. But the reason it's important for you to know is this: if you borrow the money from the bank on Monday, everything is finished. On Tuesday, you win the lottery, and you therefore have the financing, and you go into the bank and you say to them, okay, well, I have the money to pay you off. And let's say because of their terms and conditions, they accept it. The bank gives you release and move on with their life. You then thereafter find out that there was a defect in your particular title. You can't go back to the bank and say, oh, well, you know, your attorney represented me, so what is happening here? The bank will say to you, oh, okay. You know, so you have to remember those things. What a bank's attorney is looking for, even when the bank is representing you, is always good to have a separate set of eyes focused specifically on your interests. Further, if during the process you and the bank happen to have some type of squabble or issue relative to their terms and conditions, the bank's attorney will default to what the bank wants. And we have a saying in the profession as it relates to those of us who represent financial institutions: the financial institution is always right. In the past year alone, for example, I've had 2 clients in circumstances where I was representing them alone. They made the smart choice of getting their own attorney. We had to go through a lot of issues with the bank in terms of some of the obligations the banks were placing on them that I did not think was fair. And it prolonged the process, but in the end, we were able to, for lack of a better term, convince the bank why in these particular circumstances it was not fair. And my clients admitted to them, it made them feel like they had someone on their side. And they actually don't know how this would have gone if they were only using the bank's attorneys. I will say this as well. A lot of people don't realize that in Barbados, it's actually illegal to tout. What that means is that financial institutions have this habit of indicating to you or making you feel like there's somehow some obligation on you to use their attorney. And whilst yes, because of how the contentious business rules are set up, there is a financial benefit to you to using one attorney. Again, you have to balance that upfront apparent financial benefit against the potential of, if an issue arises, who do you speak to that will objectively look at you and you alone and not be interested in what is happening in the bank? So you kind of have to weigh those pros and cons. And again, I represent, as well as my business partner, we represent financial institutions. So this is against even our own interests, but we usually encourage, when we get files from our financial institutions, we always encourage as much as we can to have the person go to get their own attorney so that you have that additional set of objective eyes. By and large, many of them will still ask to use us. And once we have that robust conversation with them, we will go forward with it, but we do encourage it. Yes. Why is having a lawyer important? Now, here's what I will say to you. People will find this funny. There's no law that requires you to use an attorney to be able to finish your transaction. And if you are aware of conveyancing law, mortgage law, property law, what the obligations on the deeds of covenants are, the obligations on the deed of conveyances, the obligation on the deed of indenture, how to investigate title, what a proper route of title looks like, what is not a proper route, how to fix defects, how to fix discharges, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you're more than able to do it on your own. So the truth is, people think that
that's a lot. That's a lot, Shane.
Yes.
If you're able to do all that.
If you're able to do all that, you can do on your own. The truth is, people think that we just sit down and magically create documents. But what we are doing as attorneys is that we are assuring you that we have done all these steps to make sure that the property that is being given to you, one, can be given by the person that is giving it to you, so that you get good and marketable title. And two, that there are no defects if we happen to recognize anything that will impact you 20, 30 years down the line. And three, getting you to understand what are the obligations on you when you own that property, because depending on the area you buy property, there might be covenants that you have to comply with. And if you don't, there are particular legal consequences, as well as letting you understand what are the obligations to you under your mortgage, what non-compliance means, the powers of the bank, what they can do, the risk you are taking from a legal perspective in doing or not doing certain things. So that is really, in a nutshell, what an attorney does for you. And I like to explain to my clients, the fact that I can do it in 2 hours is because I've been doing it for 14 years, not because it only takes 2 hours. And my friend who's on this call, she posted an Instagram pic here the other day of all of the what we call the minimums of title, or the root of title, that she has to go through. And what that is our laws of Barbados require that from the date of purchase going back a minimum of 20 years, we as attorneys have to check to see how the ownership over 20 years passed over to person, and make sure there were no mistakes or defects, as we say, that impact the validity of that particular ownership, so that the person who is giving it to you actually still retains the ability to give it to you in the way that they received it.
So Shane, I'm going to stop you there, because I think that this is a critical point that a lot of people miss when it comes to why getting a lawyer is important, right? And what Shane is talking about here is that as attorneys, they go over the last 20 years of ownership of that land or that house, whatever property it is, to make sure that the person who is saying that they can sell it to you today has the right to sell it to you. Now, why is that important, really and truly? And Shane just kind of hit the nail on the head there. You don't want that 10, 15 years down the line, you get a call or a knock on the doorstep telling you, well, you are in my house or you're on my property. And then it ends up being a battle where you lose your property because you did not have an attorney who took all the steps, where you were their interest, or you decided to not have an attorney and go through this process yourself if you know the knowledge of all the steps that are needed to be taken. So that is where it's critical to have an attorney present in order to manage your home ownership process in terms of the legal parts of your home ownership. Okay.
And that also how it ties back into why you should have your own attorney. So that person is specifically focused on your interests and not your interests and the bank's. Correct. Not to say we can't do both, because I do both. But that is for me to encourage you to get your own attorney, spend the money up front, because look at it this way, it means there's a second set of eyes to make sure that everything is in line. And I keep referring to her here. I'm not going to call her name. I'm sure I'm getting a plethora of messages from her. But I remember her and I were discussing recently about a challenge, and she's a big property lawyer, way beyond me, even though I do a lot of it as well. And her and I were talking through a legal challenge that she had with a property that she was trying to dispose of on behalf of her client. And she works for even more banks than I do. And her and I had to talk it through. What is the law on it? Where do we go? The impact it has on her clients if she transfers it with this particular issue. We might be able to avoid it. And the reason it's ticklish is this. The law says that anything beyond 20 years, if there is a defect in the ownership, what we call the defect in title, that does not have the impact on the ownership now. But of course, it does mean you have to wait 20 years for you to be able to avail yourself of that relief. If something happens within that 20-year period, then you're out to sea, which is kind of how her situation came about. And so we had to have that talk. Who do we go to? Who do we speak to? How do we resolve this situation? And it actually took us looking into some serious archaic 100-year-old laws to come forward by 100 years to figure out laws that even the English even sounds different to figure out, okay, what is the impact in 2021 last year when we had that discussion? So really that is the attorney. So it's not just a matter of us calling you in and saying to you, oh, you only have to sign these documents and go through the door. Your attorney really is going through all the legal processes, all the legal steps, all the checks, all of the review, and her list, sometimes we have documents that are all up here, thick, literally hundreds of pages long. Sometimes they're handwritten in very, very old text, and sometimes the language is different. So we as attorneys have to make sure that the change in the language does not impact what is being said to you today. Sometimes, for example,
that's very interesting indeed. So I think that you've kind of answered number 5 in a few ways, you know, all the different steps involved, what people are actually paying for essentially is what that question covers. And I think that you've definitely covered that. So can you just tell us how long it takes on average to complete land sales?
We put in 90 days.
90 days.
Really, okay. It takes about 5 months. And it depends on what you're doing. A cash purchase is inevitably faster because you don't have to worry about the bank protecting their security. But the only step that changes is your attorney as a middleman attorney dealing with the bank. So the seller of property really couldn't care where you get your money from. Follow a sky, you win the lottery, you dig it up, you rob a bank, that has nothing to do with that. So your attorney really is a middleman going between, if you're borrowing the money, your bank and you, and the seller and you. And the seller understanding, generally speaking, that most people are borrowing money will give you a little bit of leeway in terms of the 90 days, et cetera, et cetera. But really and truly, if you can close a lot faster than that.
Right.
On average, however, it really does take about 5 or 6 months.
Okay.
Going back and forth. And it depends what you mean by complete, Nick. Complete for you means, yes, if complete means for you, we have the closing, that is a little more manageable. But I have some clients that complete for them means, for example, not just the closing, but they get copies of their title deeds in their hand, which means you
understood
after the closing, then have to wait for the bank to record the deeds, then go into the bank to actually get physical copies. And ironically, the reason that is important is that for you to actually, if you're buying land, for you to actually get temporary water and temporary light, you have to prove that you're owner. And one of the ways you prove that you're owner is by giving Light and Power and Barbados Water Authority the copies of your title deeds to the property to show that you're owner. So sometimes you actually do need to get them back, and you have to wait on the bank to give you copies. And most of them will not give you copies until you actually, till they actually record. So correct. It just depends on what complete means. But I would say, so you aren't disappointed, give yourself a mental space of 5 months for your transaction to be completed. And if it completes faster, all the better for you.
Fabulous. So thank you very much for that, Shane. That was quite a mouthful. I think we've learned a lot this evening about the legal side of home ownership. What do we need to do? Why we need a lawyer? The fact that the cost varies, and the cost is also something that's based on law. So the minimum legal fees that lawyers can charge for this type of work is actually legislated by the non-contentious law. Is that what it is called?
Non-contentious business rules, yes.
There we go. Right. So just keep that in mind, people, that sometimes where your lawyer is giving you these fees for your home ownership process, it might just be in line with the minimum amount that they are allowed to charge. So keep that in mind. So up next, we have our architectural technologist, Jason Green. And we have some key questions for Jason tonight. Jason, are you on?
Yes, Nikita, I'm here.
Okay, perfect. So how are the fees for drawings determined? What information is important to share with my architect or draftsman before starting my project? And before we even start, Jason, I want you to tell us what's the difference between an architect and a draftsman. How are some of the areas my architect can advise me to reduce my costs? What are the things that I will need from town and country planning? And how long does it take to get them? How long are approved plans valid for? and how do I pick the right architect for my project? So over to you, Jason.
Great. Thank you very much, Nikita. Okay, well, starting with your first question on the difference between draftsman and architect. I'll also throw into that mix architectural technician and architectural technologist, into those four categories. So a draftsman typically is someone who works within, who may or may not work within a drawing office or architectural drawing office or engineering drawing office. They typically don't have formal education as it relates to architectural design and technology. They may, over a period of years, garner the experience working in the office. A technician would be somebody who has formal education, typically maybe an associate degree or some certification in architectural design. A technologist has another step of education. They may have a degree in architecture or a master's, but they are not registered as an architect in the country. And then you have an architect who obviously would have the required educational background and be registered, fully registered to practice as an architect and have that designation as an architect in the country.
So, Jason, before you move on from that point, what's the difference in the qualification between an architect and architectural technologist or technician? You mentioned that the technologist or technician will have a degree, whether it is a bachelor's and master's in architecture or some other or similar degree. But what's the difference between what they have educationally versus the registered architect?
Right. Well, that could vary. There, I guess you can say there are various scales of where you would fall as an architectural technologist. So you may be a technologist who has a bachelor's degree and not a master's in another architectural related field. But as compared to an architect who might have done also the same bachelor's and a master's, but they've gone the next step, which is practicing under a registered architect for a required period of time before going to the architect's registration board and doing their examination. So I guess and if you were comparing two persons who had similar education backgrounds, the difference would be that the architect has gone a stage further in working in a architectural practice under a registered architect, and then going forward to do their registration, their examination.
It's very interesting to know. So know the difference, folks, between a draftsman, architect, or architectural technologist, or architectural technician, and an architect, okay? And the difference lies in their education and what exams that they have done and who is registered locally. So make sure you know when you're hiring someone to draw your home, okay? So over to you again, Jason.
Okay, thank you. All right, so starting off with the question number one, how are the fees for drawings determined? So I'd firstly like to say that you might want to look at this process rather than look at drawings, look at it from the point of view of receiving drawings. You're receiving a service of design and assistance through the process of culminating in ultimately in building your house. So it's not just drawings that you're receiving, but you're actually receiving guidance and expertise.
Jason, are you still with us? Jason? So we might be having some slight difficulties there. Can you guys still hear me? Can you hear me, Shane?
Yes, I can hear you. Jason is frozen though.
Okay, all right. So I'm just going to go ahead until Jason can kind of drop back in there. So there are two main methods for which drawings are determined. It's a cost per square foot, which I'm sure most people are aware of. So you get in a house that's 1,500 square foot, your draftsman, architectural technologist, technician, or architect will give you their price per square foot. There's the percentage of construction cost, which a lot of persons within the field are using as of late. Jason, feel free to log out and log back in, and let's get the ball rolling again. And the construction cost is the estimated construction budget that's determined. So you might have decided that you want to build a house that is $400,000 or $300,000. The size and the complexity of the project and the percentage can range between 3 to 7%. It's a full service, and the fees are broken down into stages, which we'll look at shortly. So in the case of a percentage of 4%, and a house that you are estimating will cost you about $300,000, or that's what you want to submit to the bank, that will cost you something like $12,000, and that's typically for architectural technologists and technician. For the architect, however, that's on the higher end of the percentage scale. And do we have Jason back yet?
Yes, I am. My apologies.
Oh, fabulous.
Yeah.
There you go.
I think sounds like you're doing a good job of continuing.
Well, thanks for you for listing out the answers for me. All I've done is read. So over to you, Jason.
All right. So yeah, so I was saying there are two primary methods used here on island. The first is the cost per square foot method. You typically might find draftsmen or technicians using that method. You may also find technologists using that method as well. I lean more towards using the second, which is a percentage of the construction cost. So I'll say a little more about that. Now how this is worked out is that you first start by determining your estimated construction budget. And you would have done a good job of kind of outlining how that is done by going to your bank firstly before engaging your professionals and establishing how much you qualify for and how much you actually want to spend on construction. So that gives, once you've approached your designer, that gives us a good base of, or a good idea of what you can achieve in terms of construction and square footage size or size of your house with that funding. And then we also then look at the complexity and the scale and the complexity of the project. Once we've done that, we then take a certain percentage, which may vary between maybe 3 to 7% of that construction cost to determine what the fees, the design fees or the architectural service fees will be for the process. Now, the range of 3 to 7% will vary depending on the experience of your designer. And again, where they fall, whether or not they be an architect or technologist or even a technician. But the idea being is that this percentage or this fee could then be broken down into stage payments for a full architectural service. So it may look something like starting with a preliminary concept and design stage at stage 1. This is where you after having a good idea of what you are looking to achieve in your home, we will prepare a conceptual design or conceptual layout, schematic layout, if you will, of the design and meet with you again, go over the design and make sure that everything aligns in terms of what your requirements are and it meets the budget requirement. From there, we move on to the final design stage and town planning. So based on any feedback you would have given us, we would then tweak the design, tweak the layout, and move seamlessly into the town planning prep stage, which is where we add all the relevant information that town planning needs to see on those drawings in order for them to vet and hopefully approve the drawing. From there, there would be construction drawings. This is kind of self-explanatory. Before going to your contractor, is ideal to have more detailed drawings rather than the 1 or 2 sheets that you would take to town planning, which usually have very minimal dimensional and detailed information on it. So the construction drawings takes the final design drawings a stage further and expands on the specifications that will be needed by the contractor, so he can price detailedly and get very I guess, yeah, very detailed in his pricing to make sure that there are no surprises that come up during the construction stage. Not always included or requested, but there is a tender stage where before actually going to a specific contractor, we can assist with issuing drawings or inviting contractors to tender on the project. So you get an idea of, or a comparison of the prices from maybe 4 or 5 contractors, and you analyze those tendered documents and pick the best and the most realistic from the lot. And lastly, the full service may also include contract administration and site inspection. This is the construction stage. So we've chosen the contractor, and we've gone through all the other steps that you outlined before and broken ground. And the role of your designer, technologist, or architect would be to act as your representative on site and liaise with the contractor, making sure that the drawings or the contract documents, which would include the construction drawings, are executed as stated in those drawings, and making sure that the contractor doesn't, take it upon himself to make changes that are not specified in the drawings.
Yeah, I think that's a very critical stage there, step 5, Jason. A lot of people miss that part. A lot of people take or architects or architectural technologists and technicians, not everyone necessarily allows persons to know that's a step or service that they also provide, because it's important. I don't know anything about construction, and I made sure that when I couldn't make it specifically to the site, that my architect at the time was there to make sure that what he drew was what was being built. Correct. And people definitely miss that step. So thanks for including that.
Okay.
Over to you.
Go ahead. Question number 2.
So what information is important to share with my architect or draftsman before starting my project?
Right. Okay. So I guess going back to budget, I think everything kind of circulates around the budget at the start of the project. That at least I would say a good designer would also always refer back to the budget. So having said that, you would have, it's important that you establish this as early as possible. And this is, again, going to your financial institution and get an idea of what you qualify for, or at least knowing in advance that your ultimate budget, when all is said is done, is 500,000. So what this does is gives us a base from which we can work from and start to almost reverse engineer that budget to see what is possible with that figure. Second, I would say what is important is the plot plan. And this would also represent that you have gone through the process of engaging with your lawyer and gone through the necessary due diligence in purchasing the site. With the plot plan, or without the plot plan rather, there is very little we can do, because we have no concept of where your site boundaries lie, the extent of your site. And to, even though you may have visited the site with the designer and pointed out, well, okay, the boundaries here, boundaries over to the right, and the back is here, and the front is here. That's not the safest way to approach, planning a building, because there are, oftentimes the boundary irons could have been moved, and it's much safer to use a certified plot plan from a surveyor to start to establish your enclosure, and then the architect can then work with his setbacks, or adding the setbacks from the building line, which is usually 6 feet from the side boundaries, 6 feet from the back, and usually more from the road facing side. So the plot plan is very important in engaging or a very important bit of information that you need to share with your designer as well. I think you mentioned this as well, Nikita, and you should come with an idea of the rooms and spaces you require. I think you phrase it as having your needs, wants, and nice to haves. And I think that is very important because it starts to paint a picture in the mind of your designer of what your styling taste is, what your desires are in terms of finishes and materials. And that also then feeds into building a picture of where the house would fall in context of the budget.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. It really does go back to the point about planning. You know, it's important, not just the money. I mean, not just planning for the money, but planning for what it is you actually want. What do you want those rooms to look like? You know, and Jason is really hitting home on that point there. Having an idea of what those rooms and spaces are required. You know, we're all working from at home or some variation thereof. So in designing a home now might be, you know, it might be even more important for someone to have a home office as compared to someone who might have built 10 years ago. They might not have considered that in their plans, but that might be something you might now want to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head. You know, really looking at just not now, but the future. You know, or the idea of will you be expanding on your family in the future? Or you're not, maybe you're not sure at this point. So maybe you need to consider having the house designed in a way where you can slowly expand and build out. So yeah, that is absolutely important. Styles, features, and finishes. I think that is pretty much self-explanatory and kind of relates back to the previous point. And these site-specific conditions. You know, this would be seen once the designer visits the site as well. But in the initial conversation, you know, it would be prudent to let your designer know if there are any existing structures on the site, maybe dilapidated buildings or existing houses on the site, or any natural features which you think may have to be considered as far as the design.
Definitely. Thanks for that. So we're going to wrap up here really quickly.
Sure.
So over to you again. You know, how are some of the areas that my architect can advise me to reduce my cost? And then what are all the things that I need from town and country planning? And how long does it take on average to get them?
Okay. All right. Well, I'll pick up a couple of the first, most important for number 3. Where a designer and architect would come in handy or important would be in making sure that the complexity of the design does not negatively impact your budget. For just a simple example or illustration is that where people don't necessarily consider is that the more movement you have in the house, corners, sides and faces, that typically will add to the construction costs, you know, starting from foundation right up. So, you know, I know oftentimes people like the look of a house that has a lot of movement, but it is something to consider. And a designer will help to kind of rationalize and simplify that. And that also relates to the circulation as well. To you know, you're paying. You need to consider that you are paying or building space and paying for space. And so when you have things such as long corridors and hallways, you know, get into rooms and so on, you must consider that space you're paying for that you're not using or you don't use rather than just walking through. So the things like that, a designer will help to rationalize and ultimately help you to save some costs. Lastly, the detailed drawings, if you kind of mentioned that earlier, time is money, and the worst time to make changes on a construction project is during construction. And that's the reason for the construction drawings of having those nailed down and fleshed out early on, so construction flows smoothly without many changes during the process. For number 4, what are all the things
before you move on to number 4, Jason, I'm sorry, because you really intrigued me there for a bit, and it's something I'm going to ask you. I'm going to make this statement. You can confirm for me if I'm accurate.
Sure.
But there's things that people don't realize that helps them to cut costs in their designs. Traditionally in Barbados, we've always had the homes with the rooftops. you know, I can't remember what you call this type of or style roof.
Gable roofs, pitch roofs, yeah.
There we go. And
Yeah.
what people don't realize is that that's actually more expensive than having a flat roof. You know, so as much as it gives it a more modern look now, the reality is that having those pitched roofs actually cost a bit more than having a flat roof or pouring a flat roof rather. And that's one of the, I would say, simplest ways or easiest things you can think about that can reduce the cost of your design. I think a lot of people associate modern with more expensive, not realizing that modern layouts such as an open plan actually helps to cut costs because it means you have less walls in the house. And that was some of the things that you were just mentioning. So can you confirm if I'm just crazy or?
Well, no, you're not. The cost, I think Nicholas could confirm this after when he speaks, but I've always recognized that the cost difference between a framed roof, a timber framed roof, for instance, and a flat roof could be comparative depending on the complexity of the framed roof. But let's say it's a relatively simple roof, framed roof, and you were comparing it to a flat roof. The flat roof would be less in cost. One, because it's a faster process. You know, you are erecting formwork and pouring and pouring concrete versus the process of framing the roof and then adding the various structural layers and so on. So no, you're not. That's not a crazy notion at all. And with regards to the
house
modern,
number 2 is going to have a flat roof, Jason. Just so you know.
With regards to the modern features, yes, because modern design tends to be somewhat stripped down or more honest in terms of the articulation, you can bank on the fact that it can be more cost effective to do a modern house, which is without having the additional articulated moldings and details you'd find on a more traditional house. Again, now this depends on the quantity and the sizes and so on, but you know, if we were comparing apples to apples in terms of size, yes.
Okay. So over to number 4 to you.
Okay. So for number 4, what are the things I need from town planning and how long does it take to get them? Planning approval. Planning approval can range between 100, say 300 to 400 here, but this depends on the size. But you outlined this earlier. It can range from $100 up to maybe $400 depending on the size of your house. Approval time for town planning was, or at one point in time, was established to be 2 months. This is not the case at all. This is very, very rarely.
That is facts.
Very rarely. No, it's just very true. I even, by saying 4 months, that is even being ambitious. I think you should bank on 6 months, you know, just to give yourself some additional padding if you are planning to hit the ground running as it relates to construction. So yes, you should probably budget for 3 to 6 months for town planning, because they are not the fastest of the government institutions at this moment.
Okay, duly noted on that. And I think that was quite a bit. So we're just going to finish off here really quickly with, I'm going to let you do number 6. And critical information to persons. When you get approved plans, they're valid for 5 years. So if for whatever reason your circumstances don't allow you to immediately start building, those plans are still valid for 5 years, okay? And after that time, you need to submit for a new application. So Jason, to you, how do I pick the right architect for my project? You know, how do I really go about making sure that this person is going to be the right person for me, for my design, for this project, for my budget? Yeah, what do you think? What advice can you give us here?
I think your interaction and let's just use this term, your vibe with the person, firstly is very important. So, you know, from that initial conversation to the very first meet, you should have the sense that you can work well and communicate with your designer, architect, technologist, draftsman, whoever that person may be. And they also should be a good listener, because they will be taking what you are giving them and assimilating it and processing it to ultimately give you, something that is buildable and cost effective and meets your requirements. So yeah, your ability to work with the person is important. In the preliminary stages, I also think you should note the questions that your designer or the potential designer asks as well. I call it the discovery process, because it can alleviate redesign work or back and forth later on in the process of designing, where there are misunderstandings in terms of why I didn't want this space, I wanted this space, or I wanted a 2-story building rather than a single story. So the questions they ask, and not only about the program and the size and so on, but questions not necessarily personal in nature, but lifestyle questions, about your desires. Maybe you want to expand on your family, or do you work at home currently? So would it make sense to have a workspace or a study area? So those type of questions really can add something special and unique and bespoke to your design. I think is almost, it doesn't need to be said, but you should view their past work, and you should be appreciative of their past work. It should align with the style that you are aiming for. Some designers have particular styles that personal styles that they approach designing with. Some may be more traditional, modern, or transitionals. Some may be more contemporary in nature. So it's good to view their past work and have an idea or a notion that, okay, well, this person will be able to relate to where I'm going stylistically with my house. And well, ultimately, again, coming back to budget, like I said, everything should circulate around budget, because at the end of the day, you want the house to be built. I would want the house to be built as well too, because we invest time in it and we want to see it actually come out of the ground and come to fruition.
Sorry about that. To your last point there, Jason, I think a lot of people actually don't know this, but your architect or your architectural technologist, technician, or your draftsman is generally just as or more excited than you to see this project come to fruition. It's literally taking their work and making it life size.
Absolutely.
So they're usually pretty ecstatic about these projects. So they're very much so focused on it being done and being done right.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much, Jason, for that. Simeon, come on in. Simeon is our resident quantity surveyor for tonight, and Simeon's going to answer 3 questions for us. What's the purpose of the QS? At what stage do I need a QS if I'm buying a house or if I'm building a house? And how is house or land value? What goes into those figures? All right, so over to you, Simeon.
Hi, good night, everyone, and thank you for having me, Nikita. Okay, so first question. The quantity surveyor, what role does the quantity surveyor play? So a quantity surveyor is a cost consultancy professional, and their role primarily is to advise and to direct the costing of the project, and basically to ensure that the client receives value for money and that the project is kept within cost. So as you know, as we said earlier, that the cost of a project can escalate out of control because of various parameters that, if are not followed, can cause chaos. As you would know, that one of the famous phrases in the construction industry, and more so in the public sector, is cost overruns. Now, if we engage the quantity surveyor at the earliest stage of a project, which is in the design stage, the quantity surveyor can advise on a number of things that can help keep the cost within the project. Already, as you outlined earlier, Nikita, the client would have gone to the financial institution and gotten an idea of what their budget is or what they would qualify for the mortgage. I think the next step generally should be to engage an architect or an architectural technologist, and at the same time start to speak to the quantity surveyor. Now, what the quantity surveyor can do in this stage is to tell you, okay, so your budget is $300,000. what you need to be doing is get your designer to work within X amount of square foot. So for example, because of all the historical data that we have put together over the years by doing costing for various types of projects, various styles of projects, various types of materials, various methods of construction, various restricted construction periods, we can tell that, okay, for example, a house that will cost us $300,000 can take a minimum of 9 months to be built. And so getting us involved in the early stages will allow us to basically help you make these critical decisions. As it relates to the contractor and the architect being involved at the early stages, we can sit down with other professionals and basically work out what are the costs per square foot. As Jason outlined earlier, what is the cost per square foot that we can use as a guide? Now, the architect or the architectural technologist would have used, for example, cost per square foot. Now, most contractors out there would use a cost per square foot. When someone comes to them, they would say, oh, you can build this house for $100 per square foot or $200 per square foot. But when you look at what is involved in the, or including the cost of a project, you would realize that it would actually cost more. So having a professional quantity surveyor on board in the early stages can help you avoid such pitfalls. Now, Jason mentioned something earlier that the various stages of the design process. Most times clients get what Jason referred to as concept design or preliminary designs, and they use that and go and engage a contractor. And that is one of the first mistakes I would tell persons that a client can make. The concept design is usually just a floor plan with elevations. In most instances, the architect is still working out based on the client's scope or the client's requirements, what the finishes are, what is going to be the floor finish, what is going to be the wall finish, what are the roof finishes going to be? Is it going to be a pitch roof or a flat roof? What is going to be the type of doors? And these are things that cost a whole lot of money. So once the concept designs are worked out, and then we have an understanding of what the finishes that will be used in the project will be, then we can basically prepare a specification document, which will be used to guide how we price the various elements of the building, and then work out what we refer to as a cost plan. Now, I want to point out a cost plan and an estimate are two different things. The cost plan would tell you, and on average, what is the cost of the preliminary cost of building such a project. Now, once the architect has worked out and designed the working drawings, then you can take those working drawings and then do a detailed cost, which is where the quantity surveyor can actually prepare something which we refer to as a bills of quantity. The bills of quantity is a very detailed document which tells you for every section of the building, what are the various components of that building. Now, one thing I need to point out, a lot of contractors, and that is not for everyone, but a lot of contractors, when they prepare an estimate for a client, it does not encompass everything. And so when a client takes this contractor's estimate and goes to a financial institution, if the financial institution awards the mortgage to the client based on that, what tends to happen is a lot of things are missing. And so later on, as the project is being executed, then the contractor might come back and say, oh, I did not include the cost of the windows. I did not include the cost of the doors. Or I did not include the cost of the finishes. And so that in itself presents a lot of challenges for clients. Now,
so Simeon, I'm actually going to cut you there if you don't mind, because now you've kind of piqued my attention, and I'm sure that Nicholas, our resident contractor for the evening, is piqued as well. So we're going to get to you, Nicholas, shortly. But in a situation like that, what would you advise for persons to do when it comes to getting that quotation from their contractor that has to go into the bank? Because I do understand that some contractors use I guess that first drawing or first concept design, as Jason called it, from the architectural technologist to kind of price. Should persons wait for the more detailed diagram, or should they, before they ask their contractors to price, which I think is what Jason was talking about when he spoke about doing a more detailed document that you can then send out to tender, because that document then includes all the different types of materials that you want to use for the fixtures. If you want, all glass chandelier or all wooden chandelier, if you want porcelain tiles versus standard tiles, all of those things are generally included in that document or design document that the architectural technologist will give to the contractor to price. So is it that we should wait until after the concept design and we get a little bit more details before we get it priced? Or, how do we actually manage that? Because we don't want to go to the bank and get approved for an amount that does not cover our windows. I mean, I think that windows are pretty critical to the building process. So what do you think?
Okay, so it depends on the details of engagement between the client and the architect or architectural technologist. So some persons would go to an architectural technologist or the designer and get a preliminary design. So they have an idea of what the outside of the building should look like, how many rooms, what the space layout should look like. In a lot of instances, what I found is persons take that preliminary design and they run with it.
So we should probably wait until we get the more detailed one.
Yes. So, for example, so what I have been doing in practice. So when a client comes to me to get a costing for whatever purposes, what I tend to do is I have a standard specification checklist, which I would actually sit and go through with them section for section, which is floor finishes, and I give them options, because a lot of new clients are unaware of what the various finishes options of construction materials available out there. So I would tend to sit with them and go through the process and give them options. It's probably even pull up pictures and show them what some of the finishes look like. So once I go through that process, I would include that document, that specification document with the choices that the client has selected as one of the appendices in my report, which goes to the financial institution. Now, as it relates to the contractor, what I tend to tell persons is, if you have an idea of which contractor you would like to use, you want to be comparing apples with apples, and therefore the document or the basis of my cost should be the same basis for the cost from the contractor. So most times I tell persons, okay, ensure that the drawings that that you have submitted to the quantity surveyor is the same drawing that you have submitted to the contractor. And if you need guidance in terms of the selection of materials that you have discussed with the QS, also submit the same specifications document to the contractor. So at least when he submits his costs, he has a cost based on those same finishes. Now, as it relates to the detailed drawings from the architect, once the architect has completed his detailed drawings, in most instances, the QS will then come back to the preliminary cost plan and update that document to include any changes or any final decisions that was made between the client and the architect in terms of finishes. So once we have an updated cost, and then the contractor himself would then update his cost, and then that final costing or that final document is what goes to the financial institution. Now, I also need to add that most institutions always review two documents. They review the cost report from the quantity surveyor, professional quantity surveyor, and then they also look at the costing that the client would have submitted from the contractor. So what they usually do, they usually do a comparison in terms of cost, plus or minus 5 to 7%, to see what the difference is between the contractor's cost and the quantity surveyor's cost. Now, as it relates to the professional QS, there are some items that we normally factor into our costs. One of them being contingencies. Now, the contingency is usually between 3 and 5% of the overall project cost. And what this covers is, if, for example, there's any change, and we really tend to discourage clients from making changes when you're at an advanced stage of the project. But this contingency sum usually covers any change in material costs, any changes in terms of taxes or government levies that would impact the project.
Right.
Also any changes in terms of, say, for example, a client might decide, okay, I did not include the cost of the fencing in the project. And then I decided, okay, they want to change the fencing from chain link fence to a block wall. So that contingency sum is then going to cover that additional cost. Now, a lot of clients do not like to see a contingency sum because it drives the cost of their mortgage up. But what we tend to do is, if there is no changes or increase in costs, we tend to remove that sum from the project cost.
But I think what people also miss from their financial institutions is that if you don't need that contingency amount, you don't have to draw it down. So if, let's say, you make it to the final stage and you have not drawn down on that contingency amount, then that's a good thing. And yes, simply just don't draw down on it, and then just kind of go from there. So I think that Simeon has definitely covered for us what's important. Why do we actually need a QS? You know, that person really prices out for us, how much is this going to cost? And he's pointed at which points do we need that QS? You know, you've had your architectural technologist to draw up these plans. Now might be a good time to get a QS involved, so you can sit down and go through with them what are the different costs associated with the various materials I could use for all the different areas, whether it be fixtures, plumbing, electrical, whatever the case may be, so that our roofing, you know, pitch versus flat. So that when you submit that amount, then and you submit those specifications for the materials that you've selected and the design to your contractor, that they can price appropriately, so that when you go to the bank, that what you're submitting is the real or the truest, I should say, amount of money that you do need to borrow to cover your entire project, right? And that's, you know, that's where we need to make sure we know that QS is important. So Simeon, at what stage, and I think that you've covered this in question one about what stage you needed a QS if you're buying or if you're building. So I'm going to let you answer. If there's any additional information, then I'm going to quickly go to your last question. Okay?
Yes, you can. Okay, so as mentioned earlier, getting the QS should be involved at the earliest stage of a project. And that would just minimize having cost overruns or having any issues with regards to the cost of the project. I just want to point out some of the things that would fall into a QS report. The estimated construction costs for the project, and it could be new build or extension and renovation. The estimated cost of, or what we project to be the value of the land, that is also included in a cost report from the QS. In addition to that, we give a projection of what the market value of the project will be on completion of the project. And in some instances, as QSs, we also give a projected market value at the various stages of the project. And in some instances, for insurance, property insurance purposes, we also include what is the replacement cost or replacement value for the project.
Okay, thank you for that. So your final question for this evening is, how is a house or land valued and what goes into these figures? So do you want to skip to your example and kind of talk us through that?
Yes, we should skip this because I believe our valuer will cover some of those same points that I have earlier. Okay,
so here's, I'll let Simeon go through this with you guys. Go ahead.
Okay, guys, so what we're looking at on screen is what I would refer to as an elemental cost breakdown for a proposed project. So the preliminaries, the first item, which is preliminaries, which is on average between 8 and 12% of the overall project cost. And the preliminaries basically cover temporary water supply, or basically temporary utilities, which is the water, telephone, and what have you. Some projects would require rental of small tools, rental of mixers, toilets, portable toilets, or the cost of those items will be covered by the preliminaries item. The second item here is the substructure. So basically, everything below the ground would fall under substructure. This would include clearing the site, clearing the topsoil, all the excavation. If we're in the rainy season and we have water in the trenches, it would include pumping out water from the trenches, then putting formwork for the foundation, pouring concrete, steel, everything to do with basically getting the foundations up to the floor slab level. The next level would be the frame, which would be the cost of any columns, any beams, any frames, any steel frames, if it is a multi-story residential structure, that would fall under the frame. The roof, on the other hand, would be timber roof or concrete flat roof. Under the timber roof, it would have all the members. So the roof covering, the rafters, the ridge board, the boarding on top of the rafters. In some instances, we would also include in there the ceiling structure would sometimes be included there. For a flat roof, it's all the concrete components, the steel, the concrete, the formwork, the waterproofing would fall under that. The stairs basically is just as it outlines, the stairs, which would be the concrete stairs, timber stairs, steel stairs, the handrails, the landing, everything relating to the stairs, the finishes to the stairs would fall under that. Internal and external walls. So basically, if it is block wall, if it is timber, if it is drywall, all of that, all of those different types of walls would fall under internal and external walls. The windows, you would have, if it is a timber window, sash window, if it is a metal window, fiberglass window, we would describe fully what the various windows are, the different sizes and whatnot. Same thing goes for internal and external doors. So the external doors would be your main entry door, which would include the door, the frame, the hardware, the finishes. The next item here is the wall finishes, which would be, so you have your block walls, rendering to the walls, this type of finish, which could be paint, trowel, plastic. In some instances, the walls would have decorative features. All of those would be included in the cost of the wall finishes. Floor finishes would be the render to the floors, floor tiles, timber floors, and what have you would be included there. Ceiling finishes, and a lot of persons tend to forget that ceilings do cost a lot. So if you have a concrete flat roof, most persons tend to have plastered the underside of the flat roof and then do, say, like a trowel plastic finish. You can also have a suspended ceiling from that concrete flat roof. Whereas for the pitch roof, you may have exposed rafters, and don't forget, you would have to either paint, pickle, varnish, stain, whatever finish is you were looking for. You would use, we would describe those finishes there. Fittings. Now the fittings, let me also point out, fittings cost a lot. So all your kitchen cupboards, closets, vanities, storage shelves, all of these cost a lot. So the type of timber that you're going to use, the type of ironmongery, which is the locks that you're going to use, the type of timber, and the design, all of those drive the cost of fittings and furnishings up. Sanitary appliances. So what some of us QSs tend to do, we itemize separate the general plumbing installation in the walls and the floors. We separate that from the sanitary appliances. You would appreciate that the cost of a tub is different from the cost of a jacuzzi, is different from the cost of the fixtures for a shower. So we like to outline what all the sanitary appliances are, and then keep that separate from the plumbing installation aspect of it. So the plumbing installation is basically first fix, second fix, final fix. Electrical, the same thing applies for the electrical. Solar, and electric, water heating. Now, There are various options available right now in terms of electric water heaters, solar water heaters. There's also photovoltaic, which costs quite a lot, although we have seen a significant reduction in the cost of solar photovoltaic over the years. Although the initial installation cost is high, we have to start thinking long term. So you have photovoltaic. It means that you can have electric stove, you can have your ACs running 24/7. So while you may be paying a lot of money up front, then the long-term benefits is actually very good. And separate and apart from the fact that you can actually sell back some of the energy on the grid. Now, the external drainage. So what falls under external drainage? Your grease traps, manholes, suck wells, your rainwater drainage, all of those fall under the external drainage. And one of the areas a lot of persons tend to exclude from a project is the external works and services, including the landscaping. Now, you have purchased your lot, house has been built. Depending on the size of the lot, you may need footpaths around the house. You may need a driveway. You may need an entry guard wall. You may need a security gate, electric gate, so that when you arrive home on an evening, you can just press a button and the gate opens up for you and then you drive through. Persons tend to forget that once this site has been cleared, that they have to either use the topsoil that was stored on the site. If not, they would have to go and purchase topsoil by the truckloads. In addition to that, the cost of plants. Both fruit trees and ornamentals cost a lot. So persons tend to omit the cost of those items from the project, thinking that, okay, they're trying to get the project cost within their budget or within what they qualify for. But then the project has been completed and then they realize, oh, I would like to get some grass area.
I just want to cut you there. We had an important question that came through the chat. We are going to do questions at the end briefly because we were hoping to at least cover the questions that are usually burning for individuals tonight for the various professionals. But the question that came in is what size house, number of bedrooms, etc., or the square footage is this one that you're speaking of?
Okay, so in this case, this particular project, the square footage was 1,500 square feet.
Okay, thank you for that. Can you recall how many bedrooms this was by any chance?
So what I did in this instance, I added in the content, just a lump sum of 20,000 for the contingency and overheads and profit. I added in those two amounts. But this house was a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house.
Okay, so folks, you have that. This is a
single
3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home.
3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, single story. And it was strictly standard construction. So you're talking about trial plastic on the walls,
Right.
16 by 16 ceramic tiles, treated pitch pine fixtures and fittings, which is the closets, decorant countertops, and standard light fixtures.
So this is pretty standard fittings, fixtures, structure,
Pretty
single
standard.
story, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home. And it just kind of gives you a very rough idea of what that may cost. So I hope that answered your questions. So
Yeah,
just to kind of round off there, Simeon, like this project came up totaling 391,000 approximately, give or take. And that included, as you just mentioned, the 20,000 contingency, as well as overheads and profit, which we're now going to get to as well. So just some closing remarks for you, Simeon.
Yes, so basically I want to encourage persons to engage all the professionals that they need to in the early stage of a project, just to protect their long-term interests. I think that is very, very important. As you outlined earlier, Nikita, go through that checklist of things of your expenses, things that you need to include in the project, the wants versus the needs, and then, because basically that will reduce the likelihood of you having cost overruns, or what we refer to as variations in the project. Because the worst thing you want as a client is to start your project, it being put on pause, which means that you're still paying the bridging loan. If the value of the project does not match up with the amount the bank has disbursed to you, it means that you now have to dip into your savings or dip into your pocket to get the project up to that value so that the bank can then resume disbursing funds.
Correct.
It is quite a nightmare for a lot of clients, but if you have professionals who are advising you throughout the construction process, you would basically minimize that. I also want to add that a lot of persons think that hiring the QS at the initial stages, getting the costing, and then forget about them. But I also want to stress on the fact that the QS will assist with the tendering process, contractor selection process, the site supervision, because there are times when we go onto the site, we actually pick up on things that were probably not part of the project, which we would, of course, liaise with the architect or the designers, and then basically feed that information back to the client.
Okay, so that's great. So now we've covered our lawyer, how important that person is. We've covered our architectural technologist, very key in this process, and our QS, who's going to start to put some of the numbers together for us as we go to the bank and as well as we go to financially planning. And that goes back a lot to the example, the numerical example that I gave at the start of this presentation. So now we're just going to quickly go to our last two guests this evening, which is the FM consultant and contractor, Mr. Nicholas Bell. I hope you're still with us, and apologies for being late. But we're just going to go into your segment, and here are the questions that Nicholas is going to cover for us. How are contractor fees determined? What's included in determining the cost per square foot? How should I choose a contractor? How can my contractor advise or help me reduce my costs? That one is going to be very hilarious. And should I plan for contingencies if my contractor says he or she has already? And what happens if the contractor does not complete the job or does not do it well, and I fail the town and country planning compliance regulations? Okay, so over to you, Mr. Bell. So how are contractor fees determined?
All right, good night. First, let me explain. We know this is MyTwoCents, but the FM in front of the consultancy is not financial management. It is facility management. So during my presentation, I will be wearing two different hats where I will be answering questions from a facility manager, a facility consultant standpoint, and then as a contractor. How are contractors' fees determined? This is from a contractor standpoint. Contractor fees are more commonly referred to as profits and overhead, and a line item on repair or rebuild or new builds. So basically, that is where we put what we make on the job in the line item profits and overhead. How are these determined or calculated? It is a percentage. Unlike Shane, the lawyer fees and also the QS fees, Simeon, you can cut in if I'm wrong. There is no determined percentage range, which is above or below the law that a contractor can charge a client as it relates to his profits and overheads. The range of the percentage usually has to do with the type of project, if it's a commercial or a luxury residential or a low to medium high residential project. Because persons think that once you're building a luxury residential property, you should be able to have or pay higher profits and overhead. But the percentage is usually at the discretion of the contractor, and what he himself forecasts is a profitable exercise through the event.
So what's included in determining that cost, really and truly? You know, that cost, but you know, you get some contractors that tell you it costs $210 per square feet or $220 or $250 per square feet. What really goes into determining that price point?
As Simeon would have said, the $200 or the $250 per street is what he would have calculated the house to build, to be cost to build, including, if you can go back to the slide that he had showing the cost breakdown, all of those elements that he has listed there, at the end, how we get the cost per square foot is by simply dividing the 391,000 by the total cost of the project, or by the total square foot of the project. So right. For argument's sake, if we were to take his 391 391, 327, 48, and then divide that by the 1,500. Basically, that property costs $260 per square foot. So all those elements from A to R is what will be inclusive in that cost per square foot.
It well actually is A to W, because the 391 for him, he has included.
Oh, sorry, yes, A to W,
overhead.
yes.
Yeah.
A to W, A to W.
Okay, so based on what you've shared so far, Nicholas, like in terms of that 261 per square foot in that example actually includes the cost of building the house from start to finish, and it includes the contractor's fees in that example. So that includes the profits and overhead as well.
Yes, it is.
But
yes,
what's currently the price on the market? I know that some contractors, generally contractors have an idea of what's the price on the market, the going price or rate or range for contractors. Is it, let's not say a luxury home here. We're just talking about the average Barbadian wanting a home. We know it'll vary. Is it like 260 to 300, 260 to 350 per square foot? Just to kind of give our listeners an idea of what it may cost them, depending on how low fixtures they get to how high.
Correct. So if we just deal with the shell or the enclosed part of the portion of the building, meaning the foundation, the walls, the roof, and all the necessary utilities needed to occupy the house. If we use that as a naked bare skin, you haven't painted the walls, you haven't tiled the floors, you could come up, and let's use it for arguments here, using figures rudimentary, you can say that to that point, it has cost you $160 per square foot to get the house with the foundation done, walls up, and roof on. Where the additional cost per square foot comes into play is if one client decides, okay, I don't want these 16 by 16 ceramic tiles. I prefer an 8 by 36 inch wood plank tiles, which are what you're seeing in style now. The cost between those two tiles can range from as much as $6 to almost $11 per square foot per tile. Yeah, depending on your doors. If you say you're going to go and cost less and buy ready-made, nicely designed doors, those doors can cost you between $600 to $700. But say you have a custom designed door, that door can range to $2,500 per leaf. So depending on the style and your outlook, yes, the 391 does include the cost of paying the workers, because that is an all-inclusive price. Let's answer a question there from one of the persons in the forum.
Those costs that you get from your contractor includes the workmen, everything. All of the materials they have and stuff, that equipment they have to rent. If it requires them to bring truckloads of anything, all of that is included in that 391. Yeah.
So depending on what you do after you have the shell enclosed and watertight, can either determine if your cost goes over what is budgeted or if it stays within the budgeted time frame.
So that's very interesting to know, that on average, and this is not set in stone, people, on average, just to get the structure up, just to get to the point where you now have to do fixtures, tiling, painting, all that nice stuff, to really make it look like the home you want. Up to that point, before you do any of that stuff, it's about approximately $160 per square foot.
It can range. It will vary based on, as Jason and Simeon would have said, the complexity and the design of the house. There was
so a very basic home.
Yeah, very basic.
Okay.
One point that I wanted to touch with you, we were trying to compare the cost of a pitched roof versus the cost of a flat roof. And it was kind of anxious to cut in at that point in time. Again, that varies on size. Because if you have a roof that is only covering a home that's 850 square feet, you can afford to put in a nice pitched roof. Yeah. But then when the square foot increases, obviously there's more area to cover. So the square foot cost goes up. The comparative between pitched roof and the concrete roof usually varies based on the design, the engineering design of the concrete slab. Yeah, the steel that goes into that, the engineering aspects that the structural engineer has included in that design to make sure that that ceiling or that roof does not cave in on you, can drive your costs very high. The cost of concrete is one thing too. It has risen even before the end of the year. So
I've actually found that always very amusing and interesting as well, Nicholas, that the cost, there's, we do have a local company that makes concrete, that makes cement here, right?
Cement, yeah.
You can buy that cement in other territories in the region cheaper than you can buy it here.
True, but the cement is only.
I never understood that. Why? Why can't I go to another country in the Caribbean and buy the same bag of cement cheaper than I can get it here? The same brand, same size, everything.
That's a question you have to ask Hard Rock. I am not too sure how he got it done.
Well, so that's the question that I will use to take away, because I'm always intrigued by that one.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. So the cost of the cement, the cost of the concrete varies, and then depending on the strength of concrete can range from 2,500 PSIs to 3,750 to 4,050. So depending on the grade concrete that has been designed by the engineer can dictate the cost of your flat roof.
Okay, that's quite interesting. I didn't even realize that there were different types of cement, which are then used for specific areas of the project, depending on structural needs. So that varies. That's definitely key to know. So how should I choose a contractor?
I would answer this not as a contractor.
Okay, good.
Yeah. A contractor should be chosen based on his technical ability and experience, first off. There's scenarios now where you see guys walking off the street and calling themselves contractors. Yeah. And we as builders, or we as a homeowner, should not be always drawn to the lowest cost, because you do not know how the person would have derived that cost. One, if it is that you had only provided conceptual design drawings or drawings that have been used for a town or country planning submission, you have to be very cognizant of the person's technical ability and the assumptions that are made in computing his costs. Because without the specifications, either from the architect or from the quantity surveyor, which details the whole makeup of the structure, persons try to use the grandfather clause where, oh, I know how this is done and I will put this anywhere. That can lead to a very detrimental outcome, either from a structural standpoint or from a cost standpoint. So a contractor should always be selected based on his experience and his technical ability. And as Jacinta says, similar to how you would select an architect, past projects. Yeah, past projects. Also, a suitable tendering or bidding process should be conducted with a minimum of 3 companies. And similarly, these companies should be apples to apples. Yeah, you do not want a one-stop, one-door contractor to be pricing against a Godson or a Jada or those type of established building companies, right? For one, the larger the company is in its size, you can always expect their overheads and profits to be higher. Yeah. Okay,
that's interesting to know. You are the 3rd person for the evening to mention the tendering process. And this is something that I think that typically Barbadians don't do. Barbadians generally don't put out a tender, because when we think of a tender, you think of a big commercial building, a mall, or the government is putting out a tender for some kind of construction work. But people don't realize that they can actually put out tenders just to build their home. And all that means is that you're just getting more than one person to price it for you and tell you how much they will do the job for, and you get to select out of that range of persons. I think that process is becoming a lot more popular these days.
Correct. I mean, we can remove the word tendering and let's use the word request for proposal to simplify it. Tendering is usually, that word usually connotates to some type of government institutional procurement process where you have to follow certain guidelines, and it's a tendering process. But to simplify it for homeowners, you can just simply do a RFP, a request for proposal. The document would not be as detailed or as cognizant as a tendering document, but once you have the critical information there, it will give you a very close and ballpark figure.
Right. Okay.
All right. The review of the bids in conjunction with your QS is important, because he has the experience of the cost, the going cost per rate in Barbados and locally and to the region. So he can quite easily have the 3 figures in front of him, knowing the specification that was built, and then can easily say, okay, well, contractor A, he's 100% over what it's supposed to be. And then have 2 prices that could be either plus or minus 10% of each other in cost. But then when you detail and break down the document and go through the different line items, you may find that one contractor may have missed something, and then one contractor would have added in something. So you really have to have it broken down to make sure that either everything is captured or no additional things have been added because of lack of knowledge or the contractor not being comfortable in his pricing system and just adding a figure to cover his ass, for lack of a better term. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have them provide a brief methodology. So I think that line item will more come into play once you've made a selection of the contractor. Yeah. A methodology or a statement of works is how you perceive the order of the works being done, from the excavation to the farm works and going forward. Effective communication, I found personally as a contractor and as a facility management consultant, is key. You have to feel confident with the person that you just gave a $100,000 check to. I don't think you're going to feel good that the contractor can all be nice and everything good leading up to the project, and then from the time the job starts, calling him is an issue. He's not answering the phone. You know, these sort of experiences leave bad taste in clients' mind. And the fact that you have to be involved with that person for a period ranging between 6 to 9 months, communication is key. Because if I can't feel comfortable to call you up and ask a question about what is being done on my site, and you can effectively answer my questions that I, as the homeowner who may not be as knowledgeable in construction or knowledgeable in the terms, feels confident that you're doing a good job. It's always good to ask for references. It's good to call the client, because a building can look very good on the outside. The contractor can send you a lot of pictures, but a term we use is a picture is only as good as putting lipstick on a pig. Yeah? It's very good to speak to the client directly, because yes, at the end, the structure looks very good when it's finished, but the experience that had to be, you know, through the construction period may have not been as good as the outcome. And some relationships are either made or broken during construction periods. Yeah. Number 4.
That's definitely some sound advice there about choosing our contractor. So how can my contractor advise or help me reduce costs? Or the question is, will they?
Now, this is a very technical question. From both ends, I would not rely on a contractor to aid you in reducing costs. 1, that task should be solely kept with the quantity surveyor, because the matrix in the reduction of costs, something has to give. Is it either going to be quality? Something has to give. Quality either has to be diminished. Time either have to be shortened, but with a shortened time frame, you have to accelerate the process. So the manpower either have to be more, and that may not equate to savings. How contractors, I mean, it is very ticklish, because the cost savings are not really for the client. If I save costs on the building, that cost is reflective to my profit and my bottom line. Yeah. So you will hardly find a contractor who is willing to look at a project, look at a design, and give solutions on how to save costs. Because remember, I would have spent the time to go about and have this tender done and have the bill of quantity made up. And most persons who send quotations, who send drawings for quotations, do not really appreciate what goes in to providing a quotation.
Right. So
yeah,
I actually want to remind persons at this point that most contractors, their fee is a percentage of the total building cost.
Yeah.
So they're not necessarily looking to reduce the cost, because that automatically reduces the amount their percentage is applied to, right? Which is why I wanted to get the contractor. I kind of put him on the spot with this question. because it's not his job to reduce your costs. It's your QS and your architect's jobs, right? So just keep that in mind when you are going through your process and you're talking to all the different professionals through home ownership, right? So that's what I'll say there.
Yeah, just before you move on, just to add to that one, Nikita, from experience where I was a project manager on a residential job where the client asked Nicholas, well, you know, I ain't got this lot of money, but I want your oversight on your project. No problem. And the contractor is a friend of mine. I say, oh Lord, look at trouble. And the method in which he was reducing costs was detrimental to the structural stability of the project. When the structural design called for 3 half-inch rebars in a particular fashion, he was only putting in 2.
Wow.
Right? So in a situation like that, he is saving costs because essentially he's buying less material. But by buying less material, depending on the element that material comes from, you may be creating a situation further down the road that may be more hazardous.
So you need to be able to find that balance between getting what you want and need, the costs associated with it, and obviously having a home that's structurally sound. You don't want when the first wind comes, you lost some of your roof or you lost some of your house, right?
Correct. Okay. And the value engineering process is best done at the beginning and not during the project.
Yes, definitely. I think Simeon also mentioned that as well. So these are your last 2 questions, short and sweet ones. Should I plan for contingencies if my contractor says that he or she has already done so?
My answer to that was no. But if your contractor has assumed that he planned for contingencies, it should be visible and clearly identified in your tender document or in your contract document.
Right.
Because he can say, of course, yeah, but he can say, I only allow for $5,000. Because remember, the contingency is not his money unless an approved change is needed.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
So you need to be sure that yes, he has, and have that figure bold so you know, okay, the contingency is 10,000 minus that 10,000 from the 391 using the figure that Simeon had. So you know that your true construction cost is really 381.
Right. Okay. So that's definitely good to know. Make sure that your contractor has itemized contingency if he or she is telling you that they've included it. Have them actually pull it out as a line item so you can see how much is the contingency. Okay. What happens if the contractor? Sorry.
No, one thing to be mindful of and to be very cautious. If a contractor brings you a quotation that is only a bulk figure, you have to be cautious because you do not know if he has put any thought or any processes into developing that price.
Right. That's definitely very problematic from the perspective that, you know, banks for sure, they want to see the contractor's cost by stages. And those are the predetermined stages. Most banks would actually tell you, well, we have 8 stages in our process, and your contractor has to submit his pricing based on 8 stages, right? And those are the 8 drawdown periods. So that's definitely important to know. What happens if a contractor doesn't complete the job, or they do a horrible job, or you fail the compliance regulations or requirements by town or country?
Seek legal representation.
So call Shane.
Call Shane. Straight up. Call Shane.
And Shane, we actually had a question for Shane in the chat box as well about this. What happens if you have a separate attorney from the bank or financial institution and they did a bad job? They actually missed something in that 20-year review that they would normally do. What if they missed something? What happens then, Shane?
Well, just quickly, I had answered it in the chat, so not to cut across Nicholas or Leanne.
Okay, well, great, thank you.
Yeah, it depends on so many factors because it depends on what was missing. Because there are situations that despite an attorney's best effort, they cannot actually find out that information, especially where that information impacts the 20-year review, but it is not public knowledge. There's literally no way to find out about it until such time as somebody brings it to the fore. And we've had situations in the past, for example, where people have had documents that were unrecorded. So when we started to do our checks, there's actually no indication the document even exists. And then you find out certain things. But presuming that the miss is not, sorry, better put, presuming that the miss is general negligence and the attorney just being negligent in their particular conduct and not that it is something that was beyond the attorney's ability, you would go back to your attorney and you would have a conversation with them about the time and cost of rectifying that particular issue, and you would go from there. And they would have to rectify at their cost once it is something that they could have foreseen and through
their negligence.
that did not foresee. But that is not a these categories of things are negligent and these category of things are not. You would have to actually see what the issue is and see if it's something that is generally negligent or is something that was just honestly beyond the attorney's ability to find out about.
Okay, I think those are two important determinations. Something that was in their ability to do and they just simply missed it or didn't do it, versus something that was not in their ability to do, and therefore it only came up after the fact. So that's definitely key. I mean, identifying what you should do. So last for the evening, our guests, we spoke to a number of persons tonight about the building process, the legal side, the drawings, how to price it, and then the actual build. So we're going to end off tonight with the realtor and project manager, Mrs. Leandra Jones, as we just touched on three very sharp questions here. What are the impacts? What impacts the Barbados real estate market for buyers and sellers? Is there an ideal time for buyers or sellers? And what should you consider when buying a house? So this is for our persons who don't want to go through the hassle of building, who maybe just wants a realtor and just wants to buy a home, or maybe you are going to build and you're going to buy some land. So, Mrs. Jones, are you on the line?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, great. Thank you. And we're sorry for being late, but the conversation tonight has been quite in-depth and very useful. So, what impacts the Barbados real estate market for buyers and sellers?
For the sellers, I would say pricing. And what we at Tower are seeing now is that more vendors are putting their properties on the market, be it land or homes, more realistic pricing. And what's driving that is that we're finding they're seeking out qualified agents who can provide the comps and recent market sales and things that you need in order to assist with your pricing. Right? So if you are on the flip side and you have a home already and you want to sell, these are some of the tips that you should take into consideration when putting your house in the market. On the other side of it now, which is honestly the real main factor that has an impact on the real estate market, is the ease of financing. And by this, I mean, if there are good packages on the market and what are the interest rates, because these things really drive your purchasing power, right? And Nikita, you spoke to that. You spoke a lot about, what banks have on offer and making sure that you compare. So these are the two things I would say that really have an impact on the real estate market in Barbados.
Okay, that's quite interesting to know. I think there's a misconception about realtors that everyone doesn't necessarily know. Reaching out to a realtor, there is no fee for you as a buyer. Realtors, their fees come from the seller's end of things. Whether or for the persons who have rentals. So you might have a realtor who's going to handle your rental property, or you have a realtor who's going to sell your property. And so it doesn't take anything off of you guys who are out there looking for land or looking for houses or anything like that to reach out to a realtor so that they can actually help you. And here's something a lot of people don't know. They might not have something within their portfolio that matches your budget or matches what you're looking for, but the realtors in Barbados actually have a network where they reach out to one another to find out who has properties or land or whatever the case may be that matches their buyers' preferences. And so you don't necessarily need to shop around for multiple realtors. You just need one good realtor. That's the truth. And you can actually be exposed to the entire market. Mrs. Jones is one of the realtors for Terra Caribbean. I've personally used them. I've been finding it to be quite an incredible experience so far. Definitely, I think the guys would have mentioned earlier, communication, and that's key even for your realtor.
I'm so happy that you said that, Nikita.
I think people really miss that, you know, Leandra. Like, you has to be someone who, you know, you can have a conversation with, you can really understand what you are looking for. You know, you can end up looking at properties that just don't make any sense to you, you know? So is there an ideal time for buyers or sellers?
So the answer to that is no. And this goes back to the first question you asked me. Right now, there are a lot of good rates on the market. You even give some of the percentages that the bank have right now. So it's a good time, I would say, both for buyers and sellers. And here's why. If you are a buyer and you require financing, because the interest rates are good now, it's a good opportunity to buy. And on the flip side, if you are a seller, then there are a lot of eyes on the market. So there's a lot of interest. So then it's a good time for you to sell. Right, so I just want to state a couple thoughts here on this. So if you are a buyer, right, and actually want to give two examples first of, you know, to back up what I'm saying. So a couple months ago, Tara had about 60 lots in the market, and within 3 months, we were sold out.
Wow.
Now I have another set of lots in the market, Carmichael, and we had a little over 60 lots, and we have over 40 sold. So that backs up the fact that because there are good packages and good rates on the market, that persons are buying now. Right? So some thoughts for the buyers. Nikita, you spoke extensively about this. So it's important to have a good realtor. And just echo what you said, a realtor can really hold your hand along the way and help you sift through the weeds of what's on the market. Right? And more importantly, getting that pre-approval. Now, you spoke a lot in your presentation, Nikita, about the pre-approval process and tying that to financing so that you don't necessarily overextend yourself. But on the flip side of that as well, so long as you are looking at your financial plan, and you could once you look at that, you can realize, hey, maybe I can check more boxes and get more of what I want. So long, again, and this is the caveat, everybody, that you are living within your financial means, you can get more boxes ticked. So I think the pre-approval process works not only to make sure you don't go and, you know, look at things that you can't afford, but also make sure that you are looking at things that you can afford.
Okay, that's definitely key information there to have as it relates to buyers and sellers on the market. And noting that now might be a very good time to buy. And I mentioned it at the start of this, that right now their mortgage rates as low as 3.5% on the market. So for you persons on the line, actually, who are already homeowners, or might be looking for your vacation home, or might be looking for that investment property, you know, to generate some rental income, or maybe your family has expanded and you need to scale up. For those persons who already have mortgages, one thing I want you to remember, you know, every, I said 2 or so years, one of the things that you can do is reach out to your financial institution and just send them a little email, just telling them, you know, you would like to have an interest rate review based on the current market conditions and the current market rate of, for example, 3.75%. And this is something that you can do with your financial institution. Don't let them tell you otherwise. And you can actually have a rate review to get a lower rate on your existing mortgage. And so it's clear that definitely does help you to reduce your monthly payment. But I always recommend that if you can, keep up the same payment and just simply pay off your mortgage earlier. Tell them you want the excess payment to go to your principal. So just some ideas, as Leandra mentioned, the interest rate on the current market. So Leandra, what should you do?
I want to say one thing for the sellers, right? Just so I cover them as well and answer the two-part question. For the sellers, I would say, if you stage, declutter, make your home as attractive as possible, especially given that it's a buyer's market. People, you want to present your home in the best way that you can, you know, do staging if possible. And also, if you can get that valuation, so it's going to assist in making sure you have a realistic idea of what your property can sell for. And I can't say this enough, have a qualified agent. That qualified agent is going to help you compare the comps and help you to look at the things you need to take into consideration when selling. So I just want to make sure, you know, it was balanced in
Yeah. That's a very good point too, Leandro, though. And having been looking at properties recently, I've noticed that a lot of persons, they give you a price, and when you ask for a valuation or their most recent valuation, it was 10 years ago. And I'm like, so how do we know that that current price that you're asking for is actually the current market price or the current market value? I mean, it could be higher, but for me as a buyer, it could be lower. So
Exactly.
that's very important to know, right? So what should you consider when buying a house? You know,
Nikita, again, I think that you covered this so well in your presentation. Guys, if you had to leave or came in late, rewatch. And Nikita really covered this section well. So you're looking at things that your land tax, home maintenance, your monthly costs. But I also want to touch on some things that you didn't touch on, Nikita. So also take into consideration, what lifestyle do you want to live? Do you want something that's low maintenance? Do you want a lot of space? Look at the covenants that's in the neighborhood that you're looking to purchase. Location, location, location. I cannot say this enough. If it's your starter home, you want to make sure that it's someplace that's easy that you can resell. If it's going to be your lifelong home, what about the convenience of location in which you're living? And how long has the home been built? If you're gonna buy a home, you're gonna want to see if you can get an inspection for the property. Has the property had any renovations? These are some very important things to consider. And the last two things I'm gonna mention, I know that we are over time here, is that choose a good attorney. I know Shane spoke to this earlier about it taking 5 months on average. So my colleague Rachel, actually, you can check out her videos on Instagram. She recently did one saying that we are finding that it's about average 7 months in some cases. So have a good lawyer, guys, so that you can make sure that the process is as smooth as possible when getting your home. And get your pre-qualification. This is just going to make the process so much easier for you if you know what you're looking for. I can say this over and over again, get pre-qualified. Remember, you might be able to get more, or at least you're looking at realistic things so that you can narrow, because sometimes the process can be overwhelming and daunting. So if you know what you're looking at, it helps narrow it in, it helps you make a quicker decision, and having that qualified agent to hold your hand. And I thank you, Nikita, again for speaking so highly of your experience with Tower, that you realize.
The truth will prevail.
So that's it for me, guys.
Thank you so very much for that, Leandra. And we've come to the end. I know that it was long, but I think it was well worth it, particularly we tried very much to answer a lot of the questions that we normally get from persons. We tried to make sure that any of the concerns you might have had or experiences you've had, that we had, that I had qualified persons and specialists on the call to just kind of give you an idea of what you should be doing. And I think that, and for some of the questions that are coming through asking about the recording, so this has actually been recorded. So I will announce on my page where you can find that recording so you can rewatch. But apart from that, I am going to be hosting sessions similar to this and hopefully shorter than this one every month for the year on all the topics that you guys submitted. So just a really quick recap, okay? You need to financially plan. Knowing exactly what you're looking for is key to home ownership. Knowing how many rooms you need, bathrooms, etc. Having a list that identifies your needs, wants, and the things that are nice to have, but you don't necessarily need. So there's 3 lists. And once you're done and you go over all those things, identify what kind of fixtures you want, identify, and Leandra just mentioned this, the type of lifestyle you want. And if you're only planning on ever owning one property in your lifetime, think about the different stages in your life. And I think this is something that's very critical that people don't think about. A lot of persons like to build 2-story homes, which is fine. That's great. However, if that's the only home you're going to own, what happens when you become a senior? The challenges with going up the stairs. So maybe you might want to consider having at least 1 bedroom or 1 mini master suite downstairs, a walk-in closet, the same as the master suite upstairs, but maybe smaller. So if in your older age, you need to go to live downstairs instead of going upstairs, you have that capabilities. There's also a lot of persons that in their older age ends up with property that they can't handle, to maintain. All these are things you need to think about, not just your current lifestyle, but your future lifestyle when it comes to designing your home. And there's simple little basic stuff that you can do. And this maybe goes out to Nicholas as well as Jason. You know that you're going to have to do termite treatments every number of years. So instead of waiting until the house is built today, drill holes in the wall every 5+ years. Maybe you can have the termite, the inserts that are placed in, so that they can just uncap, spray, and close back. So each time they don't have to drill holes in your walls. These are all the things that you kind of think of. The same applies to your outdoor well. You might want to treat that because it tends to get a lot of pests in it. So you might want to put some drill holes in there with a cap. So you can just uncap, spray, and close and go. So there are lots of things that I really encourage you guys to think about when you are looking to build your home. And build for the various stages in your life, children, no children, retirement, or whatever point in time in your life you think the life you're going to live, plan for it, okay? So I want to thank you all for tuning in. I want to thank the presenters so much. Without you guys, we could not have the specialist feedback. We couldn't have Shane. Thank you so very much. For you guys who are still on, here is the contact information for all of the persons who were on tonight. If you need an attorney, you can reach out to Shane Thompson. He doesn't only cover for the financial institutions, he also does individuals. I'm one of those individuals. And I make it a habit to use the people that I have used in one way or the other when I'm doing these presentations, so I can speak as a client. So Shane Thompson, you can reach out to him. Simeon Christoph, you can reach out to him. Jason Green, Nicholas Bell, and of course, ending off the evening quite fabulously is Mrs. Jones, okay? So this is how you can contact them. These are their numbers, their work numbers, their email addresses, and just so if you need their services, that you know how to reach them. And I really want to thank you guys. And I think Shane has covered a lot of the questions in the chat bot. And these are some very good comments that are coming through. Just want to make sure that we've covered at least all or most of your questions. Oh, I don't know if you guys have been following CBC News, or as of late, there are a lot of homes that are now being built with the metal frameworks instead of the bricks. And Nicholas Bell, our resident contractor, is actually the lead on those projects. So if you're looking to maybe be able to cut costs because of materials, he is one person that you can definitely reach out to do that. So again, thank you all very much for joining us tonight. And I appreciate you. And we'll be back next month with another interesting segment of My2Cents Chats, okay? Have a good night, everybody. Thanks again.